Marcus Papadopoulos is a historian, political analyst, and author who joins us from London. We also have James Tweedy, journalist and writer, who joins us from Plymouth. Welcome to you both. Marcus Papadopoulos, when you take a look at the way that this military operation of Russia has been executed in Ukraine, you're seeing one side of the narrative that's been pumped by the media into homes all over the world, reaching out to an emotional plea. But yet the narrative coming out of Russia is disregarded, covered scantily. Why is that narrative not being at least given a chance to see whether the facts on the ground, as Russia states, is actually what's happening?
War is the greatest catastrophe that can befall mankind. And what sickens me to the very depth of my stomach is how the pro-war politicians and journalists of the West are now portraying themselves as doves of peace, when in reality they are the loudest drum beaters for war whom you will ever encounter. Indeed, those men and women in the West have the blood of numerous nations on their hands: Serbs, Afghans, Iraqis, Libyans, Syrians, and Yemenis. And when we talk about the information war which the West is now waging against Russia and the Russian people, I am of the opinion that it is the greatest volcanic eruption of deceit, disinformation, and propaganda that the world has witnessed in contemporary times. Indeed, I believe that it even eclipses what the West did and said during the Yugoslav civil wars. Every single claim by Zelensky, every single claim by the Ukrainian armed forces is covered by Western media without any verification as to whether it is true or not. And yet, any claim made by Putin, any claim made by the Russian military is barely covered, because in the West, mainstream media is neither free nor independent nor impartial. It is a part of the Western establishment. That is why people in America, in Canada, or in Britain, for example, are being bombarded 24 hours a day with one side of the story. And the West does not care about the population of Ukraine. The West is only conducting this information war against Russia and an economic war against Russia in the hope that it will defeat the Russian army in Ukraine so that Ukraine remains in the West's sphere of influence.
James Tweedy, when you take a look at the approach that the West has taken, which is kind of what our guest there, Marcus Papadopoulos, alluded to, it looks like they are all out to punish Russia. They're all out to punish the president, Vladimir Putin. But when you take a look at the analytical consequences economically, I mean, let's talk about the UK, for example. I'm looking at what Market Watch has said, that the European gas prices are actually trading at $500 per barrel. And to get further into that stat, energy bills are set to hit £3,000 in the UK, which means 40 million UK citizens will be heading for fuel poverty. Just one of the consequences. Do you think that the West, the United States, and Europe, our obsession with going after Putin, decimating Russia, have taken these consequences into account?
Well, that's a good question. Did they take it into account? Do they actually want to create a kind of new normal of energy prices which are 50% or 100% higher than they were before this started? And I'm not an expert on that, but it could be the case. They may be trying to pump up prices and increase profits for certain companies. I mean, certainly, if you talk about the law of unintended consequences, but that assumes that people do not like governments. the British and US and government and the governments of France and Germany don't have enough expertise to predict these things. Certainly, the sanctions. Firstly, I want to deal with focusing on the person of Vladimir Putin, and the threats to, the calls to have him assassinated. I mean, Vladimir Putin represents the dominant political current in Russia. He does not have. They have stated that he does not have assets outside of Russia to be frozen or seized. Neither does Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. So these sanctions are just trying to create an impression that they do. If Vladimir Putin was assassinated by Western agents, firstly, that would be an act of war, which could lead us to nuclear war. Secondly, he would be replaced by someone who's just as determined to see this war through to the end. So it would be pointless and counterproductive. But okay, the sanctions. They've announced these sanctions on Russia. They said that Nord Stream 2 wouldn't be opened. It's not open yet. It won't be. It'll be suspended for however long, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, maybe indefinitely. What's that done? It's raised the price of gas to over $3,000 per 1,000 cubic meters. The oil prices, as you say, has gone back up to what it was in 2008 and so forth. They haven't actually stopped buying any of these products from Russia, and even if they did, Russia could sell it to China and India, and it would end up on the world market anyway. And in fact, I think Russia's possibly making more money out of this since the sanctions. This is what I suspect.
All right. Well, let's take a look at some of the social media posts on this matter, and we'll get back to our conversation. Our first post: the West used Ukraine to weaken Russia, but EU is still using and is dependent on Russian oil and gas supply. Russia threatening Europe with stopping gas supply to Ukraine, not ready to bow down. When is Zelensky going to have a serious talk with Russia? He can stop this war, stop getting his people killed, and instead he puts oil on the fire. Forget the West, forget NATO. We are not that stupid to engage in a war with Russia. And a final social media post: they are not fighting for Ukraine. They are fighting to control the energy. Energy equals power. The West wants the power to control the people, crippled by energy costs. We are slaves to the system. Okay, some of the social media posts. Marcus Papadopoulos, we just had a piece of breaking news on what Zelensky has said, and he is saying that the West is not keeping up to his promises of trying to help out Ukraine. How do you assess Zelensky's motives? How do you assess the fact that you have the U.S., led NATO and the U.S., who are telling Ukraine to keep fighting, pumping weapons, arms into the country, but yet they are sitting back and not wanting to engage in that? What does that show?
Well, essentially, Zelensky is a puppet of the West's, but he is a puppet who now understands that his masters care nothing for neither him nor the population of Ukraine. Contrary to what Western media is alleging, the Russian military campaign in Ukraine has been exceedingly rapid and has been exceedingly successful. One of the reasons as to why the imbecilic journalists in America and Britain are failing to understand Russia's military operation in Ukraine is partly due to their own ignorance on all matters concerning military affairs, but it is also because Russian military operations historically are conducted with what the Russians call maskirovka, military deception. And the very fact that Zelensky is now saying in public that NATO is not interested in Ukraine demonstrates the precarious situation for the Ukrainian armed forces.